Victor Deluca vanished without a trace. Tyrese King was captured at the border with a black notebook full of secrets. Nina Moretti disappeared into the digital void she once controlled. These weren't just names. They were the architects of New York's most elusive and powerful criminal empire. For over a decade, the Untouchable Gang operated beneath the city's surface, erasing witnesses, manipulating systems, and staying one step ahead of the law. But when one loose thread was pulled, everything began to unravel, revealing a network so deep, even the FBI didn't know how far it reached. In the shadows of Brooklyn's busy streets, where life never paused and traffic echoed through narrow alleys, a criminal force quietly grew. The police had no clear leads, only a name whispered in fear by those who understood the city's undercurrent. The Untouchable Gang. Their name wasn't printed in headlines, and their faces never appeared on security footage. Yet their influence seeped into every part of New York City's underbelly like water through cracked concrete. For years, their crimes left no trace. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses willing to talk. It was as if the criminals didn't exist, ghosts wearing masks of everyday life. The mind behind it all was Victor, Vane, Deluca. Once, he had been a sharp young analyst on Wall Street, the kind of man destined to be a name in finance. He had power, access, and greed, the perfect mix for something dangerous. In 2013, just as investigators began looking into a multi-million-dollar fraud case connected to his firm, Vane disappeared. But rather than hiding in fear, he used the opportunity to construct a criminal empire so sophisticated and quiet that law enforcement barely noticed it rising. Vane built his base in Brooklyn, far from the glass towers of Manhattan. He bought old warehouses, abandoned buildings, and empty storefronts. On the outside, these places looked like nothing, just forgotten parts of the city. But inside, they were hubs for stolen goods, weapons, drugs, and information. Everything moved like a machine, and the oil that kept it running was secrecy. His closest allies were not thugs or gangsters. They were professionals who had fallen out of the system. Tyrese King, a former NYPD officer with a record of brutality and corruption, had been forced out of the force after a scandal involving missing evidence. Vane gave him purpose again. As the gang's enforcer and internal security chief, Tyrese knew the streets and the law well enough to twist both in his favor. Then there was Nina Moretti, a cybercriminal once arrested for hacking into government servers. She vanished after a plea deal fell through. With Vane, she found a new home and new control. Nina didn't just hide the gang's activities online. She erased their digital footprints, manipulated banking systems, and intercepted surveillance feeds. She was the ghost in the machine. Their first major move was subtle but effective. They infiltrated New York's logistics and delivery networks. It started with 1 or 2 hijacked trucks, timed so precisely that no one even knew they were robbed. The contents, high-end electronics, designer goods, even pharmaceuticals, were quietly rerouted to their own warehouses, repackaged, and reinserted into the market through fake companies. Some products even returned to the same shelves they were stolen from. By the time the businesses realized they were missing inventory, it was too late. Paperwork looked clean, cameras showed nothing, and every potential witness remembered nothing. The gang operated under a principle: no violence unless necessary, no media attention, and no names. They spoke in code, used burner phones, and communicated through encrypted emails routed through servers in different countries. Meetings were held in moving vehicles, never the same place twice. For outsiders, their existence was a rumor. For insiders, silence was survival. They didn't look like criminals. Vane still wore tailored suits. Tyrese blended in as a security consultant. Nina ran a tech startup from a small co-working space in Williamsburg. On the surface, they were part of New York's pulse, professionals hustling through the chaos. But behind closed doors, they managed smuggling routes from South America, laundered money through offshore accounts, and bribed minor officials to keep the gears turning. People in the criminal world started calling them untouchables, because no matter how close the police came, no one could prove anything. and when someone did get too close, they disappeared. Witnesses moved away without warning. Informants went silent. Files vanished from evidence rooms. Even internal investigations within the police department collapsed without explanation. No one could say exactly when it started, but by the time the FBI noticed the pattern, the Untouchable Gang had already embedded themselves so deep into New York's infrastructure that tearing them out would risk exposing corruption in places no one wanted the light to reach. To the public, they didn't exist. To those in power, they were a dangerous secret. And to those trying to stop them, they were an invisible empire. An empire that had no borders, no face, and no mercy. The first crack in the Untouchable Gang's perfect silence appeared in late 2021. It began with a man named Lorenzo Bexley, a truck driver who had worked odd delivery jobs across the 5 boroughs for years. Lorenzo had no criminal record, no gang affiliations, and no reason to fear anything, until he was asked to deliver an unmarked container to a warehouse in Queens. The warehouse wasn't on any company registry, and the drop-off instructions came through a phone call from a blocked number. Something felt wrong. When he opened the back of the container out of curiosity, he found dozens of crates packed with what looked like military-grade weapons. He didn't say anything at the time, but the image stuck with him. A week later, Lorenzo went to the FBI. He was nervous, stuttering through his story, but he knew what he had seen. He even had photos on his phone, taken secretly when he stopped for gas. The agents listened carefully. They knew the signs. This wasn't just another gang moving handguns. This was organized, precise, and well-funded. The warehouse he mentioned had come up in a separate investigation months earlier, flagged for suspicious electrical activity, but never pursued. Suddenly, it became a priority. But before Lorenzo could testify or be placed in protection, he was found dead inside a small motel room in Brooklyn. The official cause was ruled a suicide. Pills beside the bed. A note that said he couldn't live with the pressure. But nothing about the scene made sense. The motel manager said Lorenzo had checked in that afternoon with no signs of distress. The autopsy revealed ligature marks on his wrists, bruises inconsistent with suicide. Someone had silenced him. The FBI suspected the Untouchables but had nothing to tie them to the death. No surveillance footage, no DNA. The hotel's cameras had been offline for 2 hours, right during the time Lorenzo had died. It was the same pattern. Every time they came close, the evidence vanished. Still, Lorenzo's tip sparked something. Agents began digging into other unexplained events. They found a trail 23 individuals, all with low-level involvement in logistics, cybersecurity, or supply chain auditing, who had either disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances over the past 5 years. On paper, none of them were connected. Different backgrounds, different industries, but the one link was timing. Each had contact, directly or indirectly, with shell companies tied to the same parent name, Shadowlink Holdings. Shadowlink Holdings had no physical office. It owned over a dozen subsidiaries, all in different industries: software, transportation, imports, security, even fashion. But when investigators traced transactions, they found something chilling. Massive payments moving between these companies in short bursts, often routed through countries with little financial oversight. The trail always ended in encryption, firewalls, and fake identities. One FBI agent, Clara Reed, became obsessed. She stayed late, built timelines, tracked anonymous transactions, and started linking names to faces. It was Clara who first suspected Nina Moretti's involvement. The digital signatures matched the style of a hacker group Nina was once connected to, but Clara had no warrant, no formal proof, only patterns. She started collecting everything: phone logs, shipping records, even garbage from suspected drop sites. Her apartment became a caseboard, covered in photos and red strings like a scene from a thriller. But in early 2022, just when her research was becoming dangerous, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken, not her wallet, not her electronics, not her case files, but her laptop. The only place she stored her unfiled notes and evidence had been smashed. 2 days later, Clara was suspended from the FBI. An anonymous report accused her of falsifying records and fabricating leads. The accusation was baseless, but it worked. She was removed from the case. Her files were sealed. The investigation was handed over to another department, which quietly closed it 2 weeks later. The message was clear. The Untouchables had reached inside the agency. Clara tried to warn her colleagues, but most were too afraid or too convinced she had gone rogue. The few who believed her were reassigned. The rest chose silence. Publicly, the FBI moved on. But behind closed doors, suspicion grew. How could a gang with no public presence shut down an entire federal investigation? How could they control surveillance systems, erase paper trails, and silence law enforcement? What began as a single truck driver's concern had revealed something far deeper. A network operating like a private government, one that protected itself at all costs. And those who stood in its way, even those with a badge, weren't just outmatched, they were targets. By 2023, the Untouchable Gang had become more than just a hidden criminal network. They were a silent empire embedded deep within New York's infrastructure. Their power wasn't just in what they controlled, but in how they controlled it. From smuggling drugs through abandoned subway tunnels to laundering money through start-ups that never launched a single product, every move was designed with precision. What made them so dangerous wasn't violence or chaos. It was order, ruthless, quiet order. Vane, Deluca remained the mastermind, orchestrating everything from an undisclosed penthouse overlooking the East River. He rarely left, never used digital devices directly, and issued instructions through an untraceable network of couriers and code words. His brilliance lay in staying hidden. He wasn't the face of the gang. He was the shadow behind every decision, every strategy, every silent operation. Tyrese King, the former NYPD officer who served as Vane's muscle and cleaner, had grown bolder. With his knowledge of old cases and former colleagues still in the department, he manipulated investigations before they even started. Files were redirected, leads dismissed, and tips lost in internal bureaucracy. If a street-level crew got caught, Tyrese ensured the charges didn't stick. Bribery, intimidation, and occasionally elimination, all tools he used without hesitation. Then there was Nina Moretti, still in charge of cyber operations. Her reach now extended to hacking into city records, changing permit data, and even erasing parking violations for their network of vehicles. She had developed a custom software tool that scanned for keywords across thousands of public and private communications in real time. If someone even mentioned one of their fake companies or logistics hubs, Nina knew within minutes. This gave the gang an almost supernatural awareness of threats, allowing them to act before the authorities even realized they were onto something. Everything they built functioned like a well-oiled machine. Drugs moved through Bronx warehouses disguised as medical shipments. Weapons were smuggled inside food delivery vans. Stolen identities were laundered through fake job listings and temp agencies. Every link in the chain was disposable. People who didn't even know they were part of something larger. But like all machines, eventually, one part would break. In August 2023, a minor courier named Darnell Croft was stopped in Midtown during a routine police traffic checkpoint. Nervous and sweating, he failed to produce proper documentation for the vehicle. A search of his trunk revealed a single unmarked crate, no label, no tracking, no paperwork. Inside were rare surveillance drones, military-grade, with serial numbers filed off. The street value was nearly $2 million. Darnell had no criminal record, no idea what he was carrying. He told officers he was hired through an app to deliver packages for a new courier service. After hours of questioning in a legal gray area, he was handed over to federal authorities. What no one expected was that Darnell, terrified and alone, agreed to talk. Under extreme protective measures, he began to reveal everything he knew. The buildings he delivered to, the routes he was told to take, and most importantly, the names of supervisors he'd met only briefly but remembered clearly. It was a breakthrough. Investigators cross-checked his information and found connections to at least 3 fronts owned by companies under Shadowlink Holdings. For the first time, the web had a loose thread. But the victory was short-lived. 2 weeks later, during a scheduled transfer to a government safe house, Darnell disappeared. The transport van, traveling under heavy escort, entered the Lincoln Tunnel at 2:12 a.m. Traffic was light. GPS logs show the van stopped inside the tunnel for exactly 3 minutes. When it emerged, Darnell was gone. No damage to the vehicle. No sign of struggle. The agents inside claimed they had no memory of stopping. Dashcam footage had been wiped. The FBI launched a full internal investigation, but nothing came of it. Darnell's disappearance became another mystery tied to the Untouchable Gang. And worse, it sent a clear message to anyone thinking of turning against them. No one was truly protected. Despite the fear, Darnell's information sparked further inquiries. Raids were conducted. Shell companies were dismantled. Some mid-level operators vanished. Some were caught. For the first time in nearly a decade, the Untouchables were facing real pressure. But Vane didn't panic. He simply tightened his circle, erased digital traces, and burned the lower rungs of the ladder. Tyrese relocated. Nina altered the gang's entire cyber infrastructure within days. They adapted quickly and efficiently, as if expecting this moment all along. Yet beneath the surface, tension began to rise. Whispers of betrayal, of fear, and for the first time, a flicker of weakness in an otherwise indestructible machine. By early 2024, the Untouchable Gang was still standing, but the cracks in their empire were beginning to widen. Investigations were reopening. Disconnected agencies started comparing notes, and former insiders, once too afraid to speak, began to show signs of breaking silence. The once invisible gang was finally visible, at least in the eyes of those determined to bring them down. But visibility didn't mean vulnerability. Victor, Vane, Deluca was still in control, watching the chaos unfold like a chessboard where every piece was exactly where he wanted it. The first major blow came not from the FBI or local law enforcement, but from within. One of Nina Moretti's most trusted coders, a quiet systems analyst named Felix Oren, had been secretly cooperating with an international task force. Overwhelmed by guilt and fearing he'd be the next to disappear, Felix had made a digital copy of Nina's firewall codes and encryption keys. He transferred them to a secure drive and passed them to agents during a staged business conference in Geneva. Within days, intelligence officials in the U.S. had access to years of hidden communication logs, metadata, and financial records, all heavily encrypted but crackable with time. Once decoded, the data unveiled the sheer scale of the Untouchables' operations. They had accounts in over a dozen countries, with transactions routed through cryptocurrency, shell companies, and fake investment portfolios. Their network stretched far beyond New York, into Europe, South America, and parts of Asia. But more importantly, names started appearing. Not the street-level workers, but higher-ups. Brokers, officials, and operatives thought to be ghosts now had digital fingerprints. The hunt began. Nina discovered the breach first. It took less than an hour for her to trace the leak back to Felix. She alerted Vane, who issued an immediate shutdown of their entire digital system. Files were destroyed, backups erased, and servers in multiple locations were physically destroyed or abandoned. Nina went off-grid. No calls, no emails. Disconnected completely, vanishing like she'd never existed. Vane knew what was coming and moved quickly to protect the core. Tyrese King, meanwhile, was forced into action. With raids looming, he began cleaning up loose ends, people, evidence, locations. But this time, things weren't as smooth. Informants were harder to silence, authorities arrived quicker, and public attention was growing. Journalists began piecing together stories that sounded unbelievable. Corrupt officials, erased investigations, mysterious deaths. One bold article in a major newspaper even mentioned the name Untouchable Gang. For the first time, their existence wasn't just whispered, it was printed in black and white. In a desperate move, Vane called for an internal lockdown. All operations halted. No shipments, no meetings, no communication. Just silence. But silence couldn't erase momentum. Law enforcement had already infiltrated one of their warehouse hubs in the Bronx, finding evidence that tied the gang to missing persons cases and stolen military equipment. Arrests followed. Minor players talked. Pieces of the puzzle finally started falling into place. Then came the twist no one expected. A surveillance drone captured footage of a private jet taking off from a rural airfield in upstate New York. The tail number was unlisted. On board, according to leaked intelligence, was Victor Deluca. But when agents raided his supposed penthouse hours later, they found it stripped clean. No documents, no electronics, not even fingerprints, just a single item left behind a chessboard, mid-game, with the king lying on its side. Vane had disappeared. With the empire unraveling, chaos took hold. Rival crews once silenced by fear, now moved into abandoned territories. Former allies turned on each other. Some fled, some were arrested. Tyrese King was captured during an attempted escape across the Canadian border. carrying false identification and large sums of cash. He refused to speak during interrogation but carried a black notebook filled with coded notes, enough to reopen dozens of cold cases. Nina's fate remains unknown. Rumors place her in Eastern Europe, protected by a cybercrime syndicate. Others say she died shortly after fleeing. But no body was ever found. Her name remains on international wanted lists. What had once been New York's most untouchable gang was now scattered, their secrets exposed, their silence broken. But Victor Deluca's disappearance left a lingering unease. Many believe he planned his escape long before the downfall began. Some say he's still out there, rebuilding, waiting. Others believe he's hiding in plain sight, watching as law enforcement celebrates a victory that feels incomplete. The empire had fallen, but the architect had not. And in the world of organized crime, as long as the mind survives, the machine can be rebuilt. New York had uncovered its secret crime empire, but the question remained for how long would it stay buried?